Magnetism by Soldin. Chapter 1 Binding Bracelets.
I wonder when my feelings of friendship became something more.
Fluttershy asked herself this question as she laid in her bed, her body taking comfort in the plush butterfly blanket over her, while her mind remained ill at ease.
I'm sure it couldn't have been immediately. I remember feeling
Well,
grateful
guys, I'm
and
hearing an echo.
admiring her.
Fluttershy's thoughts continued to roam at the forefront of her mind, troubling her. As the more she thought of her initial question, the less likely she felt in finding an answer.
I don't know when I started wishing we were something more, but I started to, and the thought of it was nice.
The yellow mare tugged on the blanket adorned with her cutie mark, though in shades of red and purple rather than her own pink ones, pulling the cover closer around her.
But then, before I could act, we went our separate ways.
The blankets began to move away from her, but she didn't notice as she stared blankly in the direction of the ceiling, overshadowed by black pitches of darkness.
But then we managed to meet again, only a couple of years later. But something had changed.
She raised her right hoof that contrasted with the pallor of the night to her forehead, just now noticing her coverless body.
I didn't quite feel the same with her as I did back then. The more intense feelings I had faded.
If one could have been in the room, gone about unnoticed, and pierced through the darkness, they would have seen a look of certainty that was rarely seen on the shy mare's face.
I was sure then that back then my feelings was but a crush and no one had disappeared forever.
Fluttershy turned over in the bed, and what she saw to her left made her look of certainty be replaced by one of its exact opposite.
So why?
Fluttershy couldn't help but watch the fellow pegasus beside her, whose coat complemented the night's hues much better than her own, whose mind was so at ease that she was able to whistle a cheery tune in her sleep.
Why are me and Rainbow Dash in bed together?
By the time Fluttershy was able to walk through the streets of Ponyville, the day was well on its way, with the sun high in the sky, and less than a couple of hours were left until the fillies and colts could make their way from the school and back to their homes. As for what the midday was like, it was a typical spring day in Ponyville, and the yellow pony made sure to admire it as he trekked towards her friend's house. The pony had her admiration of the day set on the clear skies when a rainbow streak passed, only to change direction and head straight towards her. Said rainbow zoomed to the ground, stopping once its origin, a rainbow maned pegasus, touched down on the ground. A small cloud of dust and dirt only just reached the onlooker's yellow hooves.
Oh, hello, Rainbow Dash.
Fluttershy called out to her friend with a quiet whisper-like voice as she made up the smallest distance between them via walking. Somehow, the speedster was able to hear her meek friend and greeted him with eye contact.
Hey, Fluttershy, what's up?
I was on my way to see Twilight. I haven't seen her yet this week, and I thought it would be nice to drop by.
The quiet pony said with her naturally hushed voice.
Huh, funny that. I was heading to Twilight's as well.
Rainbow Dash replied, tapping a hoof on her chin.
I haven't actually seen her all week either. You think she got her head stuck in some book again?
I don't know.
The mare murmured nervously, unsure she was supposed to know this piece of information.
Well, we'll see soon enough.
Rainbow Dash replied as she began to trot towards the library and residence of their friend.
Come on, Fluttershy.
Oh, coming.
Fluttershy answered as she followed on after her closest friend. Even when on the ground, Rainbow Dash never failed to make her entrance into the Ponyville library loud, thus the reason for her swinging the wooden door till it banged against the wall.
Hey, Twi, just came to...
The Pegasus pony's words were silenced upon having a magically enchanted book tossed into her face. Fluttershy squeaked in fright and lowered herself to the ground, casting a worried look back to her downed friend in case she needed medical attention. Meanwhile, a pony already within the residence yelled out in panic.
I'm awake, I'm awake!
A worried unicorn with a frazzled purple mane stood up at her table, her horns still ignited with a soft lavender glow from a spurt of magic. Though her mind had suddenly snapped awake, her eyes were not with it yet, and they took their time scanning the room and its contents, and then sending the visual messages to the horned equine's brain. Upon taking in the information of a familiar yellow-coated friend of hers sitting beside her, and checking on a familiar blue-coated friend of hers who was sitting up, rubbing her head and a book near to them that had previously been in front of her, the magical pony began to assess the situation and quickly came to a conclusion.
Rainbow Dash, Fluttershy, I didn't hit you with that book just now, did I?
The resident librarian asked what she predicted was true, and got her answer in the form of a scowling Rainbow Dash.
What gave you that idea, Twilight?
Rainbow Dash grunted as she stood back up on all fours, picked up the formerly accidental projectile and tossed it lightly towards the center table of the room.
Here's your book back.
The moment the book went in the direction of the table, Twilight's sparkle emitted an expression of panic, soon accompanied by a glow from her horn that encompassed the book. Twilight sighed at her prevention of the object falling into the stacked table, and interestingly enough for the book, a book-loving unicorn set the article of literature to the side.
So,
Twilight began to address her friends, though her focus was on inspecting the objects on the table, ensuring all of them were there and none of them had been damaged.
what are you two here for? Just check it up on you. You know, the fact that no pony had seen you this entire week.
Rainbow meant to state this fact in a scolding tone, but her attention was being drawn to the mystery stuff that laid out on the table, and as such, the words came out absent of focus or direction.
That's not true. Spike seen me. Oh, wait. No pony.
Unicorn blurted out her response before she picked up on the use of the phrase that excluded her assistant, and when the words fully registered in her brain, she halted her tongue and blushed.
Oh, yes. But you've been sending Spike out of the house a lot lately. I've been seeing him often visiting the Carousel Boutique, and I asked him about you, but not even he knew what was going on.
Fluttershy added before taking note of Twilight's rugged appearance and voicing her concerns.
Are you okay? You don't look so good.
What's all this stuff on the table?
Rainbow had walked closer to the objects of note, a curious gaze eyeing each weird and ancient-looking piece sprawled out in an organized fashion. Only a second or two after asking about the items of interest did it take for Rainbow Dash to allow her curiosity to take hold of her actions and reach out for one of them, the closest being what looked like a spear combined with a spoon. It didn't even take a second for Twilight's surprisingly fast reaction, the unicorn swiping her friend's cyan hoof away from the spearoon. After glaring at the curious athlete, till she backed off, Twilight allowed her expression to soften, and motioned for the other two pegasus to come closer towards the table.
You remember how back on Nightmare Night I helped Princess Luna become friends with every pony?
Twilight didn't per se ask, but mentioned. Regardless, an answer was received by the two pegasi, nodding their heads.
Well, afterward, we got around to chatting about things we liked, and we eventually ended up discussing history. Now, I mostly filled the princess in on important historical events that have happened since she was trapped in the moon, but she told me about the periods in which she was around. Sorry. Times of which today few records remain. It was a conversation that she mentioned something particularly interesting.
Twilight let her words stop there, drawing out in silence as she attempted to create an atmosphere of anticipation. Considering one rainbow-maned pony was already scratching absent-mindedly at the floor with impatience, she felt the anticipation had already been generated.
She talked of an intelligent, non-pony race that used to dwell within the Everfree Forest.
The scholar enthusiastically revealed, garnering slight looks of shock from her two friends.
Wait, a group used to live in the Everfree Forest? That's insane!
Twilight, this has to at least have been 1,000 years ago. I'm sure the Everfree Forest was a much nicer place back then.
Not according to Luna. The Everfree Forest was larger back then and even considered to be a country independent of Equestria, but otherwise, pretty much the same as it is now as it was back then.
Twilight Sparkle explained before going back to her original subject of the objects.
Oh, crap. Anyway, me and the princess discussed this race for a bit, but it turns out that a lot of the historical records were lost in whatever incident caused the race to die out. But it also turns out that quite a few of their tools and tablets were preserved by Luna herself. Gifts she had received from a friend she had among them. And here they are.
With a simple flourish of a raised hoof, Twilight presented that which he had been studying, which was kind of pointless, as they had been in plain sight since the two Pegasi got into the library. The only difference now is that the winged equines had a little background about the artifacts on display in the middle of the library. The artifacts ranged vastly in what they appeared to be. Some resembled weapons, others resembled tools for construction and farming, and a few were garments, and a couple of were tablets with long dead language inscribed upon them. Of course, all of the objects had their similarities too. They were mostly plain and function over appearance, and they had all taken on an earthly brown and a rustic red color of age, and all of them were designed by creatures with digits.
As for why I've been so busy studying them,
Twilight began to speak once more, drawing the attention of her two friends back to her.
I thought if I pulled an all-nighter, I could learn quite a bit about these artifacts, and then when I learned next to nothing, I tried to pull another one, and then another, and another after that, and okay, I haven't slept in the past 3 days.
Fluttershy immediately flew over to her wearied, sleep-deprived friend with a worried and caring tone advised.
Twilight, you really should get some sleep. It's not good for you.
I know, but seeing how little progress I was making with my studies on the subject was frustrating, and every time I attempt to sleep, I just kept thinking about the time I'm wasting sleeping that I could be studying.
Twilight explained to the yellow mare. The cyan mare meanwhile looked around at each of the artifacts with mild interest.
But
it's unhealthy
for you.
Sorry.
And besides, wouldn't getting some rest allow you to think better?
You're probably right, although my continuing studies haven't been without some merit. Hey, Twi! This bracelet fits my hoof!
Rainbow called the attention to herself as she waved to her friends. An earthly colored brass bracelet attached to her waving leg.
Rainbow Dash, you should ask permission before touching any of this stuff. It might be dangerous.
Fluttershy's attempted scolding tone turned to one of concern, her eyes flittering across the table at the odd and unusual items.
Well, that bracelet and its counterpart are perfectly safe. I've already tested them out and they do nothing.
The studier of the artifacts explained with a disapproving frown on her face. Although willing to allow her friend to acquaint herself with the accessory, she disapproved of touching any of the mystery items.
Which is strange. All the other objects seem to serve a purpose, like that spear you were trying to touch earlier. That was used to pry off a dragon's scales in order to stab them through the skin.
Looks of disgust shot up on the two Pegasus' faces as they gave the scale-plucking weapon from earlier a glance, shivering at what it was capable of. Pushing aside her thoughts on which she had almost touched earlier, Rainbow looked back to the thick, circular bracelet that managed to loop around her hoof as if it were made for her, and admired the plain, no-nonsense design. Fluttershy soon also joined in admiring the foreign equipment and picked up the second bracelet of the pair. She looked at it from all angles at first, taking note of its surprisingly soft feel yet metallic aesthetic, and realized it was the only item with a form of jewelry, a small white dull pearl embedded on its side.
Rainbow, you don't... do you mind if I try on the other one?
Fluttershy asked her friend, who was currently checking how comfortable her leg was with the additional weight.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
A disinterested Rainbow Dash replied. So, with both friends' permission, Fluttershy slipped on the harmless and normal pearl-embedded ancient accessory of a long-past race surrounded in mystery. It fit on her left hoof snugly, just as Rainbow Dash's did on her right, and it felt smooth and light, Nothing out of the ordinary, until 5 seconds later when the pearls from both bracelets shone in a blinding pinkish crimson color. A startled scream and a mix of surprise and questioning, "What and what the?" phrases sounded across the room as the light blossomed forth from the formerly plain pearls, blinding the pony's eyes. The force of magic made neither sound nor wind, and could not be felt by the room's inhabitant's sense of touch. Its presence was made known only by sight, or, in its current case, a lack of sight. The room soon began to dull down, or at least that's what the trio of friends thought was happening, when in actuality it was just retracting into a smaller area. This took a while though, and so Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy had their vision recovering in time, just to see some of the light still present, now in the form of a red, magical string that shot out from Fluttershy's bracelet and connected up with a pearl on the counterpart bracelet attached to Rainbow Dash. The teal eyes of the pony and the pink eyes of the other pony watched, though it still stung their eyes a little bit in order to do so, as the glowing sting slowly faded away and the pearls turned back to normal white color. Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash eyed the bracelets first. Twilight had her eyes skim the room, and then all three of them checked themselves and one another in case any harm or change had happened to either of them.
Well, I'm glad to see that nothing bad happened.
Twilight said aloud with a relief. The pearls shone once more. Rainbow Dash was about to say something, probably something witty or snarky, but halted when her body froze. Her muscles went rigid and her body became numb, and from the look on Fluttershy's face across from her, the same was happening to her. The contraptions around their hooves urged them forward, at first a gentle tug, a slight nudge, and then they were pulled off the ground and flung into one another. The collision sounded with a small thud and caused the two to fall down into a two-pony heap, small chirping birds and whizzing clouds spinning around their heads.
Girls, what happened? Why did you just leap into one another?
Twilight explained, rushing over to her two dazed friends who lay against one another. Rainbow Dash was the first to steady her head. A long history of crashing helped her with fast recovery, and began to pull herself and Fluttershy up, the two using one another for leverage. Fluttershy stood a little shaky and unbalanced, while Rainbow Dash trotted a slight distance towards Twilight and retorted,
"Leaped into one another? We didn't leap into one another. We were thrown into one another by some crazy magic thing."
The athlete looked down to her bracelet and then lifted it up to Twilight's face.
"I thought you said these things were safe." "They are. Or were. I checked and they were completely dry of..."
Twilight did not finish her sentence because her listener was just lifted off the ground and propelled into another pony, a dazed pony lacking her bearings, who had in turn been propelled into Twilight's listener. Now the two pegasi lay on the floor once more, one too dazed to register the pain on her face was coming from colliding with the back of a rainbow mane-covered head, and the latter quick to spring back up, rubbing the back of her rainbow-covered head.
"Ow,"
she uttered before turning her attention to her downed friend.
"Fluttershy, you okay? That didn't hurt too much, did it?"
While being pulled up, Fluttershy merely mumbled,
I'm okay, Rainbow Dash.
Twilight Sparkle looked on at the scenes that had been occurring before her and said,
"Well, I'm not entirely sure what's going on right now, but I'm pretty sure you didn't mean to collide into each other just now." "What gave you that idea?"
Rainbow Dash's sarcasm came with a half-lit expression.
"These weird bracelets keep glowing and then bam, having me and Fluttershy smack into one another." "I'd like to believe that I did not make a mistake when studying those bracelets, but considering the light and all, anything else?"
Well, when the pearls glowed, my body froze. Did that happen to you too?
Fluttershy asked the pony, whom she was using to support her unsteady legs, and upon receiving a nod, she began talking about the sensation.
I couldn't move at all. And then I felt my body levitating a little, and then I was thrown into Rainbow Dash.
Yeah, it's like when you stop me with your magic, except creepier. Makes you go all cold and feelingless.
Twilight thought for a moment of what she had seen and what she had been told, and then observed the current situation.
Well, seems to have stopped now.
Twilight murmured to herself, though apparently loud enough for Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash to hear as they nodded in response.
Hey, Fluttershy, you steady now?
Rainbow Dash asked her supporting friend with a cheery grin.
Oh, sorry.
The shy mare said as she let go of her Cheyenne friend and backed away a few steps.
I'm a little bit dizzy. Still, but I'm fine.
Twilight Sparkle looked to her smiling friends, smiling along with them, and then the pearls glowed once again. Shocked faces that expressed a clear dislike of whatever sensation, or lack thereof, coursed through their bodies. Showed up on the two Pegasi faces, and if you were to look carefully enough, you would see that without a flap or of either pony's wings, none of the 8 hooves in total touched the wooden floor. Knowing roughly what was coming, the unicorn present intervened with her magic, telepathically grabbing hold of her telepathically grabbed friends. At least she would have if whatever was forcing her friends still up and wasn't blocking her, and the mage's attempt were as futile as trying to place something where something already is, without destroying or moving the original something. So, inevitably, her two friends crashed into one another, this time facing each other. So if you looked at it as in a certain light, it looked like they were desperate to hug each other so that they shot themselves out of cannons. For the third time that day, the two winged ponies of yellow and cyan fell downwards, slumping onto the floor with their brightly colored bodies pressed against one another, and their heads dulled from pain and shock. Both rubbed against their heads in unison. Both helped each other to their hooves, and both were about to separate when Twilight quickly yelled out,
Don't stop touching each other!
They stopped, and an awkwardly silence followed. Said silence was broken quickly by Rainbow Dash, the only non-blushing pony in the room.
Why?
Twilight coughed once, ridding her face of its blush before addressing her two friends.
You see, the bracelets, their magic activated the moment you stopped discontinued contact with one another. I think those bracelets draw the wearer to whoever has the other bracelet on. In this case, Fluttershy. Oh.
Rainbow Dash mumbled as next to her, and still blushing Fluttershy went about pulling the earthen mystical garment off her hoof.
Twilight, Rainbow, I can't get it off.
Rainbow Dash and Twilight both turned to Fluttershy, and upon seeing her struggling and to pull off the bracelet, Rainbow Dash beside her friend, Rainbow Dash beside her tried to remove her own matching accessory. Her hoof slid across the bracelet and pushed against it, but it did not budge. So naturally, Rainbow Dash pushed harder and harder until her hoof slipped away from the smooth edge, and then became aggravated. The pegasus flipped onto her back, pulling up her back legs until they pulling on the bracelet attached to her foreleg, and attempted once more with all her might to remove it. A few minutes later, Rainbow Dash got up on all fours, panting in frustration and exhaustion, with the earthenware still right around her hoof.
Me neither,
Rainbow Dash muttered with irritation, Fluttershy placing her own garmented hoof next to her. Twilight, meanwhile, was thinking back on what she had seen while studying the bracelets from afar.
It's odd. When together, I can sense absolutely no magic from them. But once you're apart for just a few moments, it suddenly explodes with magic and pulls you two towards one another. Hey, maybe we could break the spell by going really far apart. So far, we've only limited ourselves to the room. But if I fly out at top speed, I'm sure I will surely fly out of the reach of this crazy magic thingy.
Rainbow Dash proclaimed her plan with the utmost confidence. Hearing the plan in the midst of thought, Twilight quickly observed.
Wait! No! That's a terrible!
But she wasn't quick enough for Rainbow Dash to quick enough, for Rainbow Dash had already taken off, flying out the door and into the sky as fast as she could. If the ponies of Ponyville were to look up at the sky, they would have noticed a speeding blur of rainbow colors shooting across it. Then they would have known a sort of gust of wind that had followed it, that the strong breeze came from a simply very, very fast Pegasus. Rainbow Dash had already beaten her wings ferociously in order to gain the height she needed to avoid colliding with any pony, and she was now focused on flying in the general direction of forward. She had no destination in her mind. Her flight plan was a simple one: fly as fast as she could, and as far away as she could.
I'm out of Ponyville already. Scratch. 10 seconds flat. I should be saying 5 seconds. Ah!
The well-deserved bragging thoughts of the rash pony were cut off, just like her incredible speedy flight. Her right hoof had frozen in the air, halting her entire body from moving with it.
Oh no, not again.
Was all she could mumble as a dim white pearl embedded in the earthly colored bracelet shone, an almost pinkish crimson. The strange thing with a mystical force of the artifact activated, and the racer found herself being pulled in reverse by her own accessorized leg. Before the wind was in her face, and her wings cut through the air gently. Now the wind was pressing against her mane and crushing up against her back as her efforts to fly out of Ponyville were undone. Against both the strong winds and the mystic force that felt like it was trying to tear her right forehoof off of her body, she could neither see nor hear her destination was not her starting point. The reason being that as Rainbow Dash was being pulled back to the library by her bracelet, Fluttershy was also being pulled up into the air by her own bracelet, with Twilight Sparkle along for the ride, as she attempted to keep the yellow Pegasus grounded against an ancient gravitational power by holding her down to the floor proved futile and foolish. These two screamed because they could see the painful collision about to occur, and were quite aware of the inevitable falling of great heights as they were about to suffer.
Once again, Spike, I must thank you for coming to help me on such short notice. I honestly thought I would fall behind schedule when my order of fabrics did not turn up on time, or even late.
The white-coated unicorn Rarity spoke these words as she walked alongside the purple-bodied and green-scaled baby dragon that was Spike, and out of her shop.
No problem at all, my lady.
Spike replied with a curt bow that, in turn, hid his satisfied smile.
Well, at least one good thing came out of this whole mess. I now know not to purchase my fabrics from that company ever again.
Rarity added with a giggle, accompanied shortly afterwards by her dragon companion's own short spurt of laughter. It was around this point that, on the fine, sunny and clear-skied day, that the peaceful hums of the distant birds and numerous but pleasantly toned chattering of ponies in the nearby market were overlaid by panicked screams. Every pony who could hear the noise turned their heads from side to side, trying to spot the two screaming ponies. Luckily, Spike was not a pony, so he looked up instead.
What the? Twilight and Fluttershy?
Spike mumbled in confusion as he spotted Fluttershy flying in an unusually fast and strange manner, with Twilight clinging onto her. Rarity had by now followed the dragon's gaze and looked up to the two screaming ponies, just as they knocked into a reversing Rainbow Dash. Seeing her three friends propel into one another and proceed to tumble down towards the ground at an alarming speed, Rarity quickly let out a scream of horror before sprinting into action. Her horn lit up with a magical white aura, and with her magical energy she grasped an object from the boutique and somehow pulled out a fairly large object through the smaller entrance. The falling jumble of ponies was only a few feet from the ground when a red cushioned piece of furniture slid under their crash landing spot. They fell onto the red chaise lounge before bounced off its soft surface and lightly fell on the harder, earthier floor. Immediately, Spike ran up to the dizzied and groaning Twilight and yelped out with a great worry.
Twilight, are you okay?
Yes, Mommy, I would like some syrup with my pancakes.
A spinning-eyed unicorn mumbled out as she tried to lift herself off the ground, only to fall back down immediately.
Why, girls, whatever just happened?
Rarity questioned her friend as she began to help the one she was closest to, Fluttershy, up to her legs. When none of the girls responded, she wasn't surprised. They had just taken quite a fall. Twilight tried to answer, though most of the words spewing from her mouth were scientific in nature, or about random events from her past. But she seemed to be getting more coherent as Spike helped get her balance steady. Along with her fellow unicorn and spa buddy, Rarity also cast her eyes to check on Rainbow Dash's condition, and said Pegasus was already up on her hooves atop the sofa, that she happened to be the only one to remain upon landing. Rainbow Dash was with it much sooner than the rest, and Rarity noticed a simple and old, but remarkably made attire wrapped around one of her hooves, an attired hoof that Rainbow chose to give the strangest of stares before looking over to her and Fluttershy. When Rainbow Dash tackled Fluttershy to the ground, she was surprised. Rainbow Dash did just suddenly tackle Fluttershy.
Rainbow Dash, what in Equestria are you doing?
I need to keep touching Fluttershy!
Rainbow Dash proclaimed with such volume that many ponies out of the visual range were able to hear. The designer was taken aback by such a proclamation that she halted all manner of reprimand and instead stopped thinking altogether. After looking flabbergasted at the two ponies, one yellow and getting up, the other cyan and insisting that on touching the other, she decided to continue on with the reprimand, but in a different fashion.
Not in public? Stop doing such a thing here.
Rarity, wait! Don't stop from touching Fluttershy!
Twilight incoherently blurted out. Once again, Rarity has trouble talking, but soon managed to stammer out a response.
Now, dear, while I know Fluttershy here is that way, which is perfectly fine, I might add, I hardly think she's appreciates such affection in public.
Oh, Rarity, it's not what you think.
A formerly yellow-faced but currently red-faced mare stammered out as she was got up beside Rainbow.
You see, it's because of these.
Fluttershy continued to say as she held up one of the bracelets attached to her hooves.
That me and Rainbow have to be touching.
Good.
Spike murmured before receiving a light reprimanding slap to the back of his head from the very pony she had helped to stand.
We're not sure on all the details, but I'll explain what we know so far.
Twilight said, but paused shortly after beginning her explanation, as if she had just come up with an idea better than the one she had previously.
Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash. Now that I think about it, it would be much easier if you two demonstrated what the bracelets do rather than having me try to explain it. Are you kidding? No way! I reckon these bracelets both have given me and Fluttershy plenty of bruises.
The cyan flyer retorted.
I assure you three, I do not need a demonstration, especially not in public.
It's really nothing like that.
Fluttershy once again stammered out with a flushed face.
I guess I'll start at the beginning.
Twilight Sparkle said, beginning her lengthy explanation of the events, going into more detail than what was needed for a more complicated than what her audience of three could completely comprehend. A fairly long 15 minutes later, Spike summed it up.
So those bracelets have turned Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash into magnets.
Well, that's simplifying things a bit, but pretty much.
A bored but now relieved Rainbow Dash raised a hoof in the air and asked aloud.
Quick question. If me and Fluttershy are magnets, am I top and she bottom? Or does Fluttershy top me?
A really awkward silence ensued.
Rainbow, darling, is there anything you plan on saying today that cannot be perceived as an awkward innuendo?
The athlete turned to look at the designer with a frown.
I'm not sure what an innuendo is, but I have a feeling it shouldn't like what you're implying about me.
Twilight.
Oh, sorry. Rainbow Dash, just because the bracelets act like magnets doesn't make them magnetic. They don't have a north or south pole. Oh, okay. Now, here's what I've gathered so far.
Twilight Sparkle began, her dark, bagged eyes giving each pony a look, vying for their attention.
The pair of bracelets only activated once Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy put them on. Before that, I had studied them and found no traces of magic, meaning the artifacts draw their magic from a host body. Second, and an important detail you two should note, is that the bracelets don't require being in contact, but it is the host bodies that need to be kept in contact.
The looks of confusion were of a lesser tone than before. The audience of mostly ponies and one dragon, understanding the jest but personally would prefer an example. Twilight saw these looks and followed up with,
For example, Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy need to be in contact with one another in some form, be it a hoof touching the other, a wing, any part of one's body touching any part of the other pony's body. You don't have to keep the bracelets pressed together or anything like that, and thus it isn't so much the bracelets are magnetic, but it's made Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy magnetic.
This was where the unicorn stopped for a moment, jamming briefly and mumbling gibberish to herself, before adding in another point of importance.
Third, and unfortunately, the only other thing I can say I've accessed so far, you two are only allowed to go out of contact with one another for roughly over 5 seconds. 5 seconds?!
Hermdash blurted out as he stepped forth.
That's barely any time at all, and...
Rainbow and Fluttershy quickly noticed a small distance between them and the absence of contact between them, and quickly moved next to each other, preventing another magically forced contact.
Yes, it isn't much time. But don't worry, I will solve this problem immediately.
The proud and intellectually gifted student of Princess Celestia announced, before she fell to the ground in exhaustion. Rarity gasped at this sudden and what was to her unexpected action, and along with Fluttershy zipped to Twilight's aid. Rainbow Dash and Spike simply walked a minor distance to the snoring unicorn, Rainbow Dash being sure to place a hoof onto Fluttershy when she got close enough.
I'm guessing she lied about all those times she said to me that she went to bed after I did and woke up before I woke up.
Spike asked the question with an obvious answer with a deadpan expression that made clear that this was not the first time Twilight had collapsed from exhaustion.
I'm sorry. She told us she hadn't slept in the last 3 days.
Fluttershy answered, looking up from inspecting the well-being of her now asleep friend.
She can't possibly help us in this state. She really needs to rest up first.
I was really hoping to get these cursed things up as soon as possible, but you're right.
Rainbow said with various tones of reluctance, annoyance, sympathy, and light humor.
After all, I don't want to imagine the sort of things that could go wrong if the sleep-deprived Twilight tries to help us.
The thoughts of what could happen were worrying, but despite the problematic situation, the mood was pleasant and jolly. So they saw the imagined scenario: a mad scientist Twilight diagnosing that the best solution was to amputate both Pegasus' forelegs in a comical manner, and giggled at its absurdity. Spike was still lightly guffawing to himself as he went to lift Twilight up, struggling with her larger body and trying in vain to carry his sleeping employer home.
Oh, do you need a hoof, Spike? Not to be rude to her, but Twilight may be a little heavy for you.
No, I can handle it.
Spike strained out as he managed to take a step forward, with Twilight resting on his upright back.
Now, Spike. You've done plenty of lifting for today. Allow me to carry Twilight.
Rarity said as she telepathically pulled out from her shop a roll of fabric. With a small bit of application from her magic and dressmaking skills, Rarity looped her fellow unicorn under what was now a makeshift canopy bed and pulled the sleeping mare off his ground with ease.
With this, it should be no problem getting our dear Twilight home.
Rarity then turned to address the magically bound Pegasus friends of hers.
Apologies that you're stuck in this predicament, but it shouldn't be too much of a hassle. A day or two of rest, and Twilight will be sure to get those bracelets off in a snap.
With that, Rarity and Spike walked off, Twilight resting in a floating canopy alongside them.
So, if we always have to be in contact, whose house are we going to? I can't go to mine and you to yours because of these dumb things.
Rainbow asked, holding up her bracelet.
Oh, I have to take care of my animal friends, so if you wouldn't mind, I'd really prefer if we could...
A hoof placed over the shy pony's mouth stopped the flow from whispering words. Rainbow Dash nodded.
I get it. It's no problem. Your place it is.
The end.
Are we off the stream?